Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into something quite significant. We're looking at the heart of Dutch politics. It's a moment many are calling pivotal, maybe even seismic in its history.
Absolutely. Seismic seems, well, appropriate, maybe. The
Yes.
sources you've shared are fascinating.
Yeah, really insightful stuff, Rod. We've got sharp analyses, profound discussions on the very fabric of democracy. And our mission, your mission with us today, is to really unpack what this all means.
To get a handle on the implications for governance, and crucially, this idea of collective memory in the Netherlands, it's often overlooked, isn't it?
It really is absolutely crucial. We're hearing about a decisive year, choices being made now that will, determine our future.
Yeah.
So the big question we need to ask is this a real political earthquake we're feeling? Or maybe just an echo of things we've seen before?
Indeed. And what we're looking at is this truly fascinating blend. You've got historical perspective right up against contemporary turbulence. It's this dynamic tension that really defines the current climate. So, as your guide through this material, we'll explore whether this instability we're seeing today, is it genuinely new? Is it alarming? Or is it perhaps, a recurring pattern, a rhythm the Netherlands has navigated before?
Right.
And critically, we'll dive deep into that often underestimated role of knowledge, experience, and, well, active institutional memory in shaping the political landscape.
Active memory, yeah.
This deep dive, it's designed to give you a shortcut, really, to understand the complex dynamics at play, connecting the dots between events, maybe offering some aha moments about why things are the way they are right now.
Moments are always good.
We'll trace the lineage of these challenges, show how the past is constantly, informing the present.
Okay, so let's kick things off by setting the scene. Our sources paint a pretty vivid picture, don't they? An incredibly charged political season.
Charged is definitely the word.
We're hearing terms like a decisive year, elections that are going to determine our future. One source even calls it an explosive mix. That sounds quite potent.
An explosive mix of factors brewing this intense anticipation.
And just this past week, we saw what's essentially the opening of the political season.
Right. And that's not just a casual term.
No, it's marked by significant events,
Well,
like the traditional HJ school lecture.
which often sets the intellectual tone for the year, doesn't it?
Exactly. And then the launch of campaigns, finalizing party lists, programs.
And that flurry of party congresses over Super Saturday,
Super Saturday, yeah. It really feels like everything's converging.
leading right into Prins's Day, when the king outlines the government's plans.
It creates this palpable sense of an explosive mix, like you said.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder, what's the underlying feeling here? Are we ready for a shakeup?
Well, what's truly fascinating, and the sources really zero in on this, is the contrasting sentiment around all this activity. On one hand, there's this strong intuition, a feeling some analysts have, that the current cabinet is just, well, a temporary attempt to get back to normal.
Just patching things up.
Kind of. This perspective predicts something crazier is still coming, suggesting the underlying problems are just too structural for a simple return to how things were.
Like the calm before the storm.
Exactly. As if the surface calm is just a pause before a deeper, more fundamental shift. And this sentiment even draws a pretty dramatic comparison to the 1989 moment for the West.
Wow, okay. That's a big statement.
It is. It hints at a truly fundamental reevaluation of our entire system, our political order, maybe even our societal contract. The idea is that the West, including the Netherlands, is heading towards a profound overhaul, much like the Eastern Bloc experience then.
So not just changing governments, but questioning the very pillars of the system.
Precisely.
That's a powerful and, frankly, a bit unsettling intuition. The idea, this isn't just a blip, but maybe a precursor to something bigger. Makes you pause, doesn't it? Consider the fragility of what we assume is stable.
But you also offer a different lens, right? A more historical one on this turbulent period.
Well, the sources do. Okay, the sources. Suggesting maybe it's not entirely unprecedented. That gives a different perspective.
It does, and it raises a really important question for all of us.
Right.
What is normal anyway when we talk about Dutch politics?
Good question.
If we zoom out, look historically. The Netherlands has, in many ways, always been in flux. Think about this. The average cabinet duration since 1848.
Since the modern parliamentary system began.
Exactly. It's been a remarkably consistent 2.3 to 2.4 years.
That short.
That's short, on average. So this isn't some recent anomaly, some sign of decline. It's actually a structural feature, almost by design, you could say.
How so?
Because the Netherlands is fundamentally a land of minorities.
Yeah.
It's a patchwork of diverse groups, opinions, shaped by centuries of pillarization, religious, social, economic blocks.
Right, those distinct ideological communities.
And that inherent diversity requires continuous compromise to govern effectively. It leads to what some might call a wobbly system, constantly negotiating, forming new alliances.
Sounds unstable.
Wobbly, perhaps? But crucially, it's proven incredibly resilient, adaptable over centuries. It's a system built on constantly finding that common ground, however messy it looks. And we've certainly seen periods of major upheaval before, things we often forget when we're anxious about the present.
Like when?
Well, take the end of the 19th century. Between about 1880 and 1917, the Netherlands effectively stood still due to internal conflicts, huge societal shifts, especially around the school struggle, funding for religious schools, and universal suffrage.
Oh, okay. Big divisive issues.
Huge. Major legislative reforms stalled for decades because of these deep ideological splits. So this historical context reminds us that navigating intense turbulence, it's not new here. It's kind of baked into the Dutch political character. A historical rhythm, not a sudden rupture.
So the system, in its own weird way, is designed for this.
It's designed to accommodate and absorb these ebbs and flows. It forces parties to seek common ground, even if it looks inefficient from the outside. So while today feels chaotic, it definitely echoes these patterns of resilience from the past.
It's the Dutch art of pragmatic consensus building.
You can see that, yeah.
Okay, building on that historical view, let's talk about Super Saturday. Our sources really delve into this phenomenon. 6 political congresses on one day.
Quite the logistical feat.
Wasn't just logistics, though, was it? It was a pivotal moment. Parties formally setting out lists, programs, but also in this hyper-visual image culture we live in now.
Crucial for projection.
Exactly. Projecting themselves, their leaders, their vision. Rhetoric and visual presentation were key that day. Let's look at some key moments and what they tell us about current strategies and the power of perception.
Super Saturday definitely gave us a unique snapshot of those strategies, especially around leadership and public image. Take Henri Bontebal of the CDA, the Christian Democrats.
Okay, what do the sources say about him?
He was described as shining, standing alone on the stage with full conviction, boldly declaring, "We are not left, we are not right, we are Christian Democrats."
Right, trying to carve out that distinct space.
It seems carefully orchestrated, projecting self-confidence, a strong, singular leader, especially for a party trying to regain its footing after big losses.
Makes sense. An attempt to rebuild trust, present a clear identity in a fragmented landscape.
Emphasizing core values over, fleeting alignments. It's an old strategy, but it can work when voters want clarity.
And then, in stark contrast to Bontebal standing alone, the sources highlight Delenya Silges of the VVD, the outgoing PM's party.
Yes, a very different visual.
She was seen on a stage full of faces, the whole VVD list right behind her.
And the VVD, as we know, is struggling a bit in the polls.
Right. So the perception was she was trying to appear calmer, less venomous.
That's what the sources suggest, especially after a difficult summer, the government collapse.
So a strategic image correction, soften the persona, Project Unity.
It looks like it. An attempt perhaps to counter those electoral headwinds.
A deliberate pivot from maybe a perceived aggressive stance to one of collected leadership. Interesting.
But this really highlights a crucial dynamic in modern image politics, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, the VVD's perceived attempt at a sudden change of appearance, it carries a big risk. The risk that the public might see through it, see it as just a campaign trick.
Right. Authenticity is key.
Exactly. There's a danger that earlier missteps or maybe a tougher image from the past get projected onto her now. It could create a self-fulfilling prophecy where her rebranding efforts are met with skepticism.
Especially with intense media scrutiny today, people are attuned to perceived inauthenticity.
They really are. However, it's also true that fortunes can change fast in campaigns.
That's true.
We have that powerful example, the 2012 Samson campaign. Diederik Samsom, PVDA leader then, polling terribly in the summer, but managed a dramatic comeback in the final weeks.
I remember that. Almost tripled their seats, didn't they?
Pretty much. Strong debates, effective messaging. So while it's challenging for Silges now, it's not irreversible. But it requires careful navigation, a genuine connection that goes beyond just image management.
Okay, so beyond the individual leaders and their images, stable governance has emerged as this uh, pervasive buzzword, almost a magic spell, as one source put it.
Repeated across the spectrum, yeah,
Yeah.
after the mess of recent years.
It signifies this collective yearning for predictability, effective leadership, some calm in the storm.
Understandable.
But this very desire for stability also exposes some interesting fault lines, doesn't it? Tactical maneuvering behind the scenes. Like the Breckelman's incident. That was quite something.
Yes, the Breckelman's incident perfectly illustrates how precarious that stable governance narrative can be in the heat of a campaign. So, in Breedenhoff, a prominent current affairs show,
Right.
Reuben Breckelmans of the VVD initially said, quite reasonably, quite pragmatically, that parties shouldn't be principally excluded from coalition talks if the goal is stable governance.
Sounds logical. Keep options open.
A pragmatic approach acknowledges the need for broad cooperation in a fragmented system, however, within an hour of that broadcast.
An hour. That's
Yeah.
fast.
Astonishingly fast, he publicly retracted it, clarified that a coalition with PVDA Grow Links, the Labor Green Left Alliance, and VVD was highly unbelievable.
Wow. The speed, the U-turn, is
Ah.
very telling. Suggests immense pressure. And what's really fascinating here, quite revealing about the climate, is how quickly the VVD campaign team must have tapped him on the nose, as the source put it.
Clearly, the immediate fear, presumably.
Was that getting too close, even hypothetically, to DVDA grown links?
You would give Geert Wilders the PVV leader.
Shooting chances. An easy target to attack the VVD from the right. Accuse them of being soft, open to the left,
Right, which would completely derail their carefully crafted narrative of stable governance.
pushing the campaign back into that short-term media-driven mode, sound bites over substance.
It shows the acute pressure on politicians. Maintain that consistent poll-friendly image.
Even if it means backtracking on initial pragmatism or openness.
Exactly. That kind of knee-jerk reaction highlights the extreme sensitivity to public perception. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this dynamic reflects a profound shift. A shift in how politics operates, how voters engage.
How so?
Well, in earlier times, voting was often more like a census of the pillar. Stable sociocultural ties were paramount.
Right, you mentioned the pillars before.
Your grandparents, for example, might have consistently voted for, say, the ARP, the old Christian Democratic Party, or the PVDA, Labor, generation after generation, based largely on their religious community, social class, economic group.
Loyalty was almost inherent, part of your identity.
Precisely. You voted with your community, your pillar.
But that's changed.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
From the 1980s, 90s, especially with commercial radio and TV becoming pervasive, the momentary impression became increasingly important.
Charisma, debate performance.
Immediate reactions started to hold more sway than those deep-seated loyalties. And today, we're in a much more diffuse sociocultural situation.
The pillars have crumbled.
Largely, yes. And consequently, it's much more about the person, their perceived quality, their authenticity, their immediate performance, how they connect emotionally.
And they're held accountable very quickly for any misstep.
Very quickly. Often amplified massively by social media. This intensifies the focus on image, on short-term reactions rather than long-term ideology.
Creating a much more volatile electorate.
Absolutely.
So what does this all mean for leadership and voters today? This focus on persona, presentation, it isn't entirely new, is it? Our sources remind us.
No, definitely not.
Cicerone's brother wrote a book back in 60 BC about being seen, presenting well in elections.
The art of political presentation has deep roots.
And even Abraham Kuyper, a key figure in Dutch history, often called a greatest populist.
A pivotal figure in the ARP.
He heavily focused on image formation, used sophisticated media strategies for his time, newspapers, speeches.
Absolutely. The power of rhetoric, public display. It's not new. Classical thinkers like Plato and Aristotle wrote about the derailment of Athenian democracy, precisely because of manipulative rhetoric, focusing on emotion over reason.
So the basic principles are ancient?
They are, but there's a crucial difference now compared to Kuyper's time.
Okay.
While Kuyper was a master of image, a great communicator, he also relied on a fixed faith community, a stable, underlying group of loyal followers that he carried with him that the ARP carried for nearly 100 years.
His image resonated within a strong, committed network that already existed.
Exactly. The difference now is the lack of that stable underlying layer, that strong ideological adhesion. Parties like the old ARP or PVDA commanded that kind of loyalty.
Do them now, mostly.
Modern politicians operate in a much more fluid environment. Voter loyalty is less ingrained, which makes managing public perception even more critical and, paradoxically, more volatile.
Because there's no deep anchor.
Right. The absence of those deep-seated ideological ties means the momentary impression, the personal appeal of a candidate, it carries disproportionate weight, driving the rapid shifts we see in polls and public opinion. It's a fundamental shift in political connection.
Okay, let's dive deeper into the structure itself then. We've heard that everyone at these congresses is talking about political stability, like a mantra.
Almost a desperate plea sometimes.
But given what you've just outlined about the land of minorities, the history of flux, it begs the question, is instability, or at least a certain fluidity, kind of baked into the Dutch political system, maybe even by design?
That's a central question. And the system's unique accessibility definitely plays a huge role.
How accessible is it?
Extremely accessible, almost threshold-free, meaning it's remarkably easy for new parties, even small ones with a very specific agenda, to get into parliament.
You don't need a huge vote share for a seat.
Exactly, and we've seen loads of examples in the last 20 years, the rise of LPF, BBB, Forum, PVV.
Parties that came from seemingly nowhere to gain significant representation.
Right. Now, this accessibility is often cited as a reason for fragmentation, for perceived instability. But we need to consider its deeper implications, both the good and the bad.
A double-edged sword. Highly representative, but often complex to manage.
Precisely.
So what are those broader implications? Some see accessibility as the source of the problem, the constant coalition wrangling. But you, or rather the sources, highlight its strengths too, often underappreciated strengths. So how does this wobbly system actually benefit Dutch democracy?
Well, this system, despite the perceived downsides, frequent cabinet changes, complex multi-party coalitions, it's argued it fits us like a glove because we are this land of minorities.
Unlike countries with a dominant majority culture.
Right. We've always been a mosaic, different groups, viewpoints. We need a system that reflects and accommodates that. And the system, by its nature, forces compromise.
You have to work together.
You have to. And Dutch people are, historically and practically, used to making broad compromises. Not necessarily because everyone's always happy about it, not because they're rainbow people.
But because it's practical. For getting things done.
Exactly. Practical for governance, for execution in a nation of diverse opinions. That's why proposals for, say, a 5% threshold, often suggested to reduce fragmentation and increase stability.
They pop up now and then.
They do. But implementing one would be profoundly un-Dutch. A 5% threshold in current projections would wipe out almost 7 parties from Parliament.
Including long-standing ones.
Yes, like SGP, the Reformed Party, and Christen Unie, the Christian Union, often regionally focused parties. It would fundamentally alter our representative democracy, silence legitimate, albeit smaller, voices.
It would break that compromise-driven spirit.
In a way, yes. And the strength of this accessibility lies exactly in its ability to let an undercurrent be heard.
Undercurrents of public sentiment. Specific concerns.
Yes, it enables individual MPs, even with just one seat, to leave a significant footprint on the national agenda. They can introduce topics larger parties might ignore because they're focused on broader issues.
You give an example.
Sure. Think of Sylvana Simons. With a single seat for her party, BIJ won. She played a crucial role bringing the slavery discussion, institutional racism, cultural problems to the forefront.
Right. She definitely raised the profile of those issues.
Or Peter Umsik. Initially as a lone MP after leaving the CDA, he effectively challenged the government, highlighted systemic failings like in the child care benefits scandal.
A powerful example of an individual MP's impact.
So the system acts as a vital pressure valve. It gives diverse voices a platform. It can relieve some of the tension that builds up in society instead of letting it fester outside the political process.
So it ensures more perspectives contribute, even if it makes coalition building look bewilderingly complex to outsiders.
That's the argument.
However,
Yeah.
the system also gets considerable criticism, especially now in this polarized climate. Over 50 parties potential on the ballot. Some argue that's the end of the line for a system designed for a time of a few clear, socially organized groups.
The world has changed, the argument goes.
And the constant splintering. Like the Party for the Animals fragmenting over pacifism and defense industry support.
A disagreement on pacifism. Yeah.
It's a stark example of what some analysts call endless micro-identities, demanding representation.
Like every nuanced disagreement needs its own party now.
Feels like the system is strained by this ever-increasing number of niche viewpoints.
leading to a parliament that mirrors society's fragmentation rather than maybe consolidating it. Well, while it's true, fragmentation is a consistent feature, and the rise of microidentities is observable, maybe exhausting, it's important, again, to place this historically. Avoid presentism.
Meaning?
Meaning, historically, fragmentation has actually been even higher than it is today.
Really? Higher?
Oh, yes. Look at elections from 1919 or 1933. The political landscape was far more splintered then. Even more factions in parliament. We've actually moved from, say, 20 factions in the second chamber down to around 15 now.
Oh, interesting.
And the prediction is it might stabilize around 12, 13 after the next election. So this ebb and flow of party formation, consolidation, it's part of the inherent tide action of Dutch politics.
Not necessarily terminal decline, but a dynamic process reflecting societal shifts.
That's one way to look at it. The system adapts, maybe clumsily sometimes, but it adapts to the changing demands of its diverse electorate.
Okay, transitioning from the system structure. We also have analysis from Maurice de Hond, a well-known Dutch pollster, commentator. His view is more stark, maybe alarming for some.
Yes, de Hond offers a different, perhaps more urgent perspective.
He suggests something more profound is happening beneath the surface, beyond the usual tide action.
Maurice de Hond's insights highlight a profound, almost seismic shift. He uses terms like Veenbrand and aardbeving.
Veenbrand, peat fire.
Yes, a smoldering, persistent fire burning underground, indicating deep, hidden societal discontent.
And aardbeving is earthquake.
Right. He points to the dramatic decline of the traditional big parties. Remember, 1998? PVDA, CDA, VVD together had 112 seats, a commanding majority.
Seems like a different era.
It almost is. Now, in current projections, PVDA maybe 9 seats, CDF 5, VVD just 15.
That's a massive drop, a hollowing out of the center.
Unprecedented. And this huge migration of voters to the flanks, far left, far right, it's made forming stable governments incredibly difficult.
Because those traditionally relied on combining 2 or 3 of those big center parties.
Exactly. De Haan's calculations really illustrate the challenge starkly. Forming a left-leaning coalition, even including the CDA, it would need maybe 6 parties now, unwieldy.
6 parties, right.
And a right-leaning coalition without Wilder's PVV. Almost impossible, given their projected strength, maybe 37 seats.
That's unprecedented.
It is. He argues this extreme fragmentation leads to more instability, lower public trust, because governments are harder to form, less representative of a clear majority, more prone to collapse.
Hence the Veenbrand, the smoldering discontent.
And he warns of the aardbeving, the earthquake, the big one, the PVV potentially hitting 37 seats. It implies a systemic shock our current structures struggle to handle, pushing the system to its limits.
So not just a wobble, but a foundational shift in how people vote.
That's his argument, yeah.
And this leads right into voter volatility, doesn't it? De Haan's data. Voters consider an average of 2.2 parties before choosing. That's incredibly fluid.
Extremely high volatility, very low party loyalty compared to the past.
And that example, 22% of PVV voters in 2023 hadn't even considered them 5 weeks before the election.
A staggering figure. Shows how much can change in the final stretch.
Suggests a campaign landscape where last-minute shifts, events, even one debate can have a monumental impact.
Makes predictions incredibly hard, campaigns incredibly frantic. Absolutely. And this high volatility means the upcoming election is likely to become largely a referendum on a single polarizing question. Is Timmermans in the government or not?
Frans Timmermans, the PvdA GroenLinks lead candidate.
Yes. That framing will significantly impact the VVD's strategy. Force them to differentiate from the CDA by explicitly ruling out cooperation with Timmermans.
To capture right-wing voters who want to block him. A strategic game of exclusion.
Precisely. And despite all this instability, fragmentation, interestingly, high turnout is expected, around 78%.
So people are still engaged, even if loyalties are fluid and trust is eroding.
Deeply engaged. And the sources remind us, events can still play a decisive role late in the game.
Like the 1977 train hijacking, which hurt PvdA.
Or the 2017 incident with the Turkish minister, which boosted VVD.
Unforeseen events with significant impact. Underscores the unpredictability in this charged environment.
Absolutely. Anything can happen.
Okay, this brings us to something really critical, often unseen, but underpinning so much of this. The challenge of memory and knowledge in our democracy. Your recent book, Active Memory, delves right into this, arguing it's fundamental to how our system functions or, well, malfunctions.
It is fundamental, yes.
So what exactly is this loss of institutional memory? What are the real consequences?
Well, the loss is severe and pervasive. It affects multiple layers, parliament, bureaucracy. Just look at this figure. In 2023, 77 out of 150 MPs didn't return to the second chamber.
More than half. Gone in one election cycle.
Exactly. That represents a huge amount of knowledge and experience just walking out the door.
Expertise on specific topics, procedural knowledge, historical context.
All gone. The sources highlight that new MPs often don't even know the way to the coffee machine, let alone the intricacies of parliamentary work.
Takes time to learn the ropes.
It takes 4 to 5 years to truly know the job, to understand the unwritten rules, build networks. Even after 10 years, many say they're still learning.
So this constant churn means deep expertise, historical context are often just absent.
Right at the heart of our legislature, leading to repeated mistakes, lack of continuity, and it's not just about individual MPs forgetting things. The problem extends to high-level advisory bodies, the ones meant to provide consistent, evidence-based guidance.
Like the Education Council.
Exactly, the Undervisrat. They recently advised on teaching non-native students in their mother tongue for integration.
Okay.
What's astonishing is this very idea was experimented with for 20 years in the 80s, and it failed. It led to the widely accepted language approach, Dutch immersion, for effective integration.
So they recommended something already tried and discarded.
Precisely. A clear indicator of a complete lack of institutional memory within a crucial advisory body. Recycling failed ideas.
Wow.
Similarly, debates on, say, the Anglicization of universities reveal a parallel knowledge gap. Even within parties like NSC, there seems confusion about their own leader OMSIC's past views on it.
So the collective memory of past policies, successes, failures isn't being preserved or referenced.
Leading to this constant reevaluation of disproven strategies. Reinventing the wheel, often at great cost.
That's a really powerful point. Not just individuals forgetting, but collective institutional amnesia, leading to a system struggling to learn from its own past. Which brings us to the broader philosophical case for memory. Why is it so crucial, beyond just avoiding policy mistakes?
Philosophically, a democracy is fundamentally a collective imagination, built not just on laws, institutions, but on shared history, shared experiences, shared norms and values of knowing.
A common understanding of how we got here, how things work.
Exactly. As the French philosopher Ernest Renan put it, a nation isn't defined by race or language, but as the science of having done things together and wanting to do even more.
A collective memory forming a shared imagination.
That shared memory mobilizes society, gives it cohesion, purpose, the ability to project a shared future. It's crucial for leaders to embody and reflect this memory, crucial for the whole democracy to function.
And well, Plato's analogy.
Right, Plato's analogy. The constitution of an individual repeats itself in a state. If the head of the state becomes forgetful, like an individual with memory loss, it leads to a chaotic, diffuse government.
Mental disorganization in the state, contributing to societal unrest.
A feeling of aimlessness, lack of clear narrative rooted in a shared past. A forgetful state is a disoriented state.
So if I'm getting this right, a leader who seems forgetful, disconnected from the past, isn't just seen as less capable, but fundamentally unable to ensure continuity, provide stable direction.
They lose that trust that comes from a consistent, historically informed approach, yes.
And you make another compelling point. A market has no memory, no conscience.
Right.
If governance operates just by market principles or short-term polling.
It can lead to amoral decision-making, driven only by immediate gains, efficiency.
Not long-term well-being or historical responsibility, a dangerous short-termism.
Exactly. And this problem, this lack of memory and transparency, isn't just in Parliament. It extends deep into the executive branch, the bureaucracy, manifesting as a profound transparency crisis.
The wet open override, the Open Government Act.
Which is designed to ensure public access to government information, promote transparency. It's simply not being implemented as intended.
We have examples.
Disturbing ones from the sources. A state secretary withholding crucial data on agricultural emissions for 2 years. A ministry blocking the release of financial records for 3 years.
That's not just inefficiency.
No, it means we are systematically prevented from knowing what has happened. It undermines trust, accountability, makes it impossible to learn from past decisions.
The foundation of informed public debate just crumbles.
When information is deliberately obscured, yes. And this systemic failure isn't new. It's not unknown within government. An inspection back in 2010 already flagged this, explicitly calling the Dutch government a dementing government.
Dementing, because of its inability to manage and retain information.
Precisely. And the alarming part, that inspection was repeated in 2023. not because it was solved, but because it had gotten even worse.
Worse. Despite all the digital tools we have now.
Exactly, which should make archiving easier, more comprehensive. But archiving remains a mess. Vital information, even WhatsApp messages of the Prime Minister, gets lost or deleted.
A huge paradox in the digital age. Information should be more accessible, yet it's vanishing.
Creating this black hole in our collective institutional memory, the government literally struggles to remember itself.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and maybe a bit unsettling. Is this just sloppiness, a systemic failure to prioritize something mundane like archiving? Or is there something more strategic, maybe deliberately self-serving at play? Is it a bug or is it a feature?
It's likely a complex mix, a vicious cycle reinforcing itself. There's certainly a culture of almost sloppiness, where maintenance, proper archiving, they aren't priorities.
Mundane tasks get pushed aside for more immediate political issues.
Allowing critical information to just fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
That happens, however. There's also a significant fear culture within ministries.
Fear culture.
The constant scrutiny, journalists, opposition, social media demanding information, accountability. It leads to strategic discussions within government about what to release and when.
Fear that information, out of context, could be weaponized.
Palpable fear of that. And this connects directly to politicians' intense fear of being judged in a poll tomorrow.
Losing their position.
Right. Creating this self-reinforcing cycle of short-term thinking, where transparency is sacrificed for immediate political survival, accountability is evaded.
Further eroding trust and deepening the government's dementia.
Exactly.
And this cycle, this culture of opacity, short-termism, it seems to have found a potent embodiment in what's called the Root Doctrine. Mark Root was PM for over a decade. His style became defining.
Very much so.
What exactly is this Root Doctrine? How does it worsen these memory and transparency issues?
The rep doctrine, as described in our sources, it's a political culture characterized by massaging people.
Massaging people. A euphemism.
For carefully managing public perception, expectations. Also, opportunism. And flexibility. That often raises questions about where you stand exactly on issues.
Pragmatic, maybe evasive. Blurring clear ideological lines to maintain power.
That's the description. And it's seen as a direct consequence of permanently polling and observing public opinion, essentially treating politics like selling a product to focus groups.
Adjusting the message based on consumer feedback. If polls say something's unpopular, downplay it.
Or reframe it, prioritizing immediate public reaction over consistent ideology or long-term vision.
Which leads to a lack of substance, a constant chasing of the hype of the day.
Rather than sticking to a foundational vision, yes. It stands in stark contrast to parties like, say, the SGP. Regardless of size or appeal, they maintain a remarkably consistent vision, a clear stance.
Demonstrating the stability that comes from an unwavering core, even if it's not widely popular.
Right. The Rote Doctrine, in essence, epitomizes those very short-term memory-eroding tendencies we've discussed.
So where does this leave us? Us citizens, voters, the future of the Netherlands. We've looked at the turbulence, the system's intricacies, the profound challenges from eroding memory and transparency. How do we, as a society, as a democracy, start to turn the tide, address these fundamental issues undermining our institutions?
Well, there are two main, often conflicting perspectives emerging from the sources on the path forward. One perspective says, essentially, don't be too panicked.
Okay.
It argues we should cherish our unique democracy, its inherent resilience. The system, despite fragmentation, constant compromise, it has historically always managed to find solutions, form governments.
Even if outsiders don't get it.
Exactly. Sources note outsiders often don't understand how such a country can be governed with so many parties. Yet the Netherlands consistently remains one of the most prosperous and happiest countries in the world.
Suggesting a built-in resilience that withstands these periods of apparent instability.
A pragmatic adaptability that defies conventional political science, perhaps.
So, if I'm hearing you right, this view suggests the current instability, the churn of cabinets, parties, endless negotiations. It's not necessarily a reason for a deep fear or terminal decline.
Not necessarily.
But rather a natural rhythm, a feature, not a bug. Something our system is uniquely designed to handle.
That's the argument from that perspective, yes. And the historical parallels, particularly with the period before World War I, offer support.
How so?
In that era, the Netherlands successfully navigated huge destabilization. New political challengers, profound shifts on suffrage, education. Society was fragmented, new mass media were emerging, traditional structures challenged, much like today.
And yet,
The country managed to emerge relatively unscathed, unified, achieved major reforms through arduous compromise. So this historical lens encourages a more optimistic outlook, emphasizes the system's capacity to adapt, find its footing again.
suggesting this wobbliness is actually a dynamic form of stability.
That's the idea, however.
Yeah.
There's another perspective,
Okay, the counter-argument.
which warns we might be facing something more like the period before World War II.
That sounds more ominous.
It does. In that era, the divisions weren't just political or tactical. Fundamentally different life philosophies were at stake. Deeper, more intractable ideological divides.
Not just political squabbles.
Right. This view suggests the current tension between global and national interests visible across Europe globally is a core issue challenging the very foundations of shared understanding and compromise.
Implying that while the system is resilient, the ideological chasm might be wider, more fundamental now.
Posing a unique test to its ability to forge common ground, the stakes might be higher this time. Demanding more than just pragmatic compromise, maybe a redefinition of what it means to be a Dutch nation.
That stark contrast in perspectives is crucial, whether it's a familiar rhythm testing resilience or a profound rupture demanding fundamental change. The question remains, what's the practical path forward? What can be done to revitalize democracy, especially on these critical issues, memory, knowledge, transparency?
What's critically needed, really, across both perspectives, is an open debate.
Openness, honesty.
The sources argue convincingly. People can handle the truth if it's presented openly, honestly, with its complexities. This continuous concealment of information, so ingrained now, it's a very pernicious development, systematically eroding trust, institutional memory.
So what's the alternative?
A political party or even individual politicians willing to just lay it all out. Their considerations, choices, compromises, complexities that could gain significant, lasting trust.
And practically.
It means making serious work of archiving government information. Not as a chore, but a foundational pillar of accountability historical record. It means constantly referring back to historical context in policy discussions. Fostering an environment where parliamentarians preserve that memory, civil servants preserve that memory.
Is there any sign of that happening?
Encouragingly, there's a growing recognition of this cognitive void within the civil service itself, suggesting internal efforts might be starting, recognizing the corrosive impact.
So you're calling for politicians to be more transparent, to dare to say what I want and what I don't want, not just be swayed by polls or focus groups.
Yes. Have the courage to value memory, history, and continuity.
Even if explaining that takes more time, more effort, a longer, more nuanced conversation.
Even then, trusting the public can grasp complexities, appreciate honesty over facile messaging. Precisely. And this could be a powerful, even a winning strategy now. So many people sense this lot of fear among politicians who hesitate to take clear, consistent stands.
So honesty could be rewarded.
It could. Explaining historical context, connecting current issues to past successes, failures. It provides that much-needed perspective people can indeed grasp. Fosters shared understanding, continuity vital for a healthy democracy.
Moving beyond short-term calculations.
Embracing a culture of openness, honesty, valuing memory. It could truly revitalize our institutions, rebuild trust.
Requires courage, though.
A courageous step from leaders, institutions, but absolutely essential for the long-term health coherence of our system. It's about building a future that actually remembers its past.
So what does this all mean for you, our listener? We've delved deep into this intricate dance of Dutch politics, election fever, personalities, but also that profound unseen role of memory. And this deep dive reveals, while instability might be a recurring theme, part of the Dutch system, the current erosion of institutional memory, of transparency, that poses a unique, maybe more serious challenge.
To the very foundation of accountability.
So for you, the listener, here's the provocative thought. In this age of information overload, political volatility, a potentially dementing government, how much responsibility do we as citizens have to actively remember our shared political history, to seek out context, to demand accountability?
To ensure the health and continuity of our democracy.
How might your active memory shape the future, not just by voting, but by engaging with the past, questioning the present, demanding a more transparent tomorrow?
It's a profound question, really, about our ongoing role in preserving our collective political consciousness. Recognizing democracy isn't a given. It's a constantly tended garden of shared understanding.
Keep those questions in mind as you navigate the news. Make your choices. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.